Good morning. Hi, I'm Dave Barnes with the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and I have to tell you how excited I am to be part of the STEM Leadership Alliance and this summit. It's one of the highlights. A big shout out to Kelly and Sal and all the team that makes this happen. So I'm going to talk with you today about the M in STEM and share that. So let me get started here. There we go. So the M in STEM, it's more than counting, measuring, and histograms. So as I was thinking about my session today, a few things has changed recently. It's not all quite the same. I decided to, what I really wanted to say was to talk about now more than ever, the M in STEM. Just look around. It is one of those pieces. So it's that element that really makes a difference for us. Math is everywhere and STEM is everywhere, and it's one of the pieces that we need to use, tools to use to make sense of our world. So when we get started, so if you look under the discuss button on the right-hand side, can you share where you're from? We actually do webinars almost every night at NCTM, and people share where they're from. It's a great conversation in that. So if you would do that, that would be great. It just gives me a sense of who's here and what's going on. All right. That's great. So I like to do an audience participation session, even if it's virtual. So the next piece is to share your thoughts in chat. All right. And here's my question. For what % of adults was their last formal mathematics learning experience a -1? What do you think the answer to that is? So in that chat, share what you think, what % of adults their last formal mathematics learning experience was a -1. And we're among friends, so just take a guess. What do you think that number is? Oh, there we go, 75%, 50%, higher than history and art, 35%, 100%. Thanks, Chris. Okay, 70, 80, all right. Okay. Yeah, lots of ideas coming in. That's great. All right. All right. So the answer is 97.5%. And you think it's higher than that? Okay. All right. And that's the other part. I made that up. Okay. That's right. One of the things is whenever I do this, if I say 97.5%, people don't say, no, that's wrong. They're like, wow, okay. And that's really a scary piece. We do have a perception problem and we do have an engagement problem and an issue in mathematics. We want kids to be engaged. Part of it's about building their identity because now more than ever before, we need students to be able to think and use and apply math. All right. There's also the humor. I found this graph pretty interesting. Time spent looking at exponential graphs. You notice in January it's down at 0 and okay. Well, with this crowd, I think that there's, you understand that. So I'm going to jump forward. And Steve Barbado talked earlier yesterday and sort of was one of the kickoff pieces about STEM 4, the power of collaboration for change. And I want to connect that with something that NCTM has been working on called Catalyzing Change in High School Mathematics. That came out about 2 years ago. We have also a middle school and elementary and early childhood version, and these share some of the same core ideas. I think that the key ideas that we think about relative to collaboration with STEM and across STEM are also key ideas that we think about in terms of change and mathematics. So to start out with, I asked, why learn math or why learn STEM? And we would argue that there are really three big ideas about why learn math. that often, and I think as teachers, sometimes we hear students say, why do we need to know this? And if the answer is, well, you're going to need it to do the next thing, that's not good enough. We need a bigger and better idea about why learn math. And I would say there are three big ideas. One is to expand our professional opportunities. The second is to understand and critique the world. And the third piece is about experiencing joy, wonder, and beauty of mathematics. And we may get some laughs there because joy, wonder, and beauty is not what people often think about when they think about their math learning experience. But this is really about the identity and building kids and students and teachers' identity as doers and users and appliers of math. And that's actually where one of the big places where STEM and learning math can come together. Now, I'm going to start in the middle one, understand and critique the world. You've heard about this COVID-19 pandemic, right? As we think about that, NCTM actually turned 100 years old this year in 2020. And we were supposed to have a meeting on April 1st in Chicago with thousands of people to celebrate and learn. Well, that didn't happen. Mid-March comes and everything gets shut down. So within a matter of 2 weeks, we turned around the conference to be 100 days of professional learning. And one of the things that I want you to know, you can see the URL there, nctm.org/100, that these are online webinars Monday through Thursday. They're free to everyone. There's materials. It's also on Facebook, but we want you to come and be a part of that. And one of the things that we did, the second session that we did was about teaching through the pandemic. And that was back on April 2nd, trying to make and use mathematics to make sense of our world. So I want to share a couple things that people talked about in that session, because this is elementary through middle school. And how do we think about math? So one is, do we have enough toilet paper? And if you remember back in March and April, that was a big question. This is definitely an elementary piece. How do we think about that? How do we build models? What do we understand? And it's something that elementary kids can start to understand and apply mathematics to make sense of their world. It's one of those areas to do that. The next part, what does social distancing look like? How do we think about what it means to kids? And this is one of the places where I think math and STEM all come together in trying to make sense of the world. So as we talk with students, how many kids can reasonably fit in a classroom? So here's the classroom, here are the dimensions. How do we get them in there? Do they have to come in and out certain ways? How do we seat them? What if somebody has to go to the bathroom? Why is it 6 feet, right? All of those questions start to apply mathematics in a real world context to try to make sense of our world. And it's also the case where oftentimes students will ask questions, they'll notice and wonder something, and that noticing and wondering causes a reason to need to learn more mathematics. And so this is one of the places as we think about teaching math and engaging students in learning math that is very much like the STEM pieces, where you have to ask questions, you have to engage. You're, as students and teachers, doing the sense making. You're not having someone do it for you, but you're working to make these pieces happen. And as we move on then to high school, there's an NCTM app. So we looked at one of these questions about what does this look like? And I'm gonna now share, let's see. And let me see if I can share. And one of the things that's important for students is to try to make sense of the world. So the things we hear about, are about social distancing, wearing masks, doing those types of things, all the graphs. So we work with a developer, Mark Snyder, to build a simulation that models the pandemic. And I will tell you that we started on this years ago when we had the bird flu. And the challenge was that by the time we got it built, that was sort of a past piece. But we re-upped for this one. And so this app actually provides a universe. Each of these squares could be a person or a family, and you can choose the size of your population. And we limited it to just 3 variables: the days contagious, the chance of contracting the virus per contagious contact, and we have that set at 6%, and then the number of contacts per day. How many people do you come in contact with? And we run a simulation, and you can actually step through. The red means that you're just infected, and we can step to, you notice on the blue, this person is contagious now. They've changed to that. And they move through, and the next day they infected 2 people. And you can start to see how they come. But you'll notice then up on this graph, we're barely moving at all. All right, so I'm gonna just play this for a second. And you can see that, we're getting a few more people, And we actually start to see some of the growth type things that are happening on the curve, right? And this is an interesting piece for students. The thing is that this is all built on probability, and the piece is who you come in contact with and those types of things. And we'll continue on. And the question is, like, how many people get infected? Out of these 1,600, now we seem to be leveling out. And it gives a sense of the experience that students can have. With this, you can also say, all right, which of these things can we impact? Can I impact the days contagious? And right now, we don't have a vaccine and that, so that's pretty much set. At this point, that's 10. The chance of contracting the virus, how do we do that? Well, that's by washing our hands, by wearing masks, and the number of contacts per day, that's about staying home, not going out. One of the things that's also interesting about this is what people notice, and you'll look at this, the distance from the red all the way to the gray, well, that's our 10 days, okay? But what people want to look at is how tall are the blue bars? Because those are the people that are currently sick, and are we able to see that in those pieces? So it's a great tool to start to have some discussion and work in thinking about and making sense of why things make sense, and using math and STEM to make sense of our world. All right. To my presentation. There we go. So you can see the link at the top, but there's activities around these, around all of these elements. The one thing that's interesting, and people start to talk about R, and that's one of the things of the science piece is, what's the infection rate, and how do we get that down, and how do we flatten the curve, and do those types of pieces. So you can have a range of topics and discussions around that of using the simulation. If you go to nctm.org/100, actually the day 2 webinar is recorded there, and Dan Teague does a wonderful job to that. The other piece about math in our world, and I'll just say, is about social justice. And I think that there's a real opportunity for using mathematics to make sense of our world. Stephen Levitt talked yesterday about statistics and data analysis and using that. This is one of the places. There's lots of statistics. We need to use those to make sense of what's going on. And I think that is both a mathematics and a STEM piece. We have to be engaged in using the tools that we have in mathematics and across STEM to make sense of our world. And I think that's another area that's ripe for our work. The next piece is about increasing opportunity. How do we increase opportunity for students, and what does that mean in education? And the one piece of data that I will show you is that almost 60% of students are not ready for college math when they leave high school. We have a real challenge in that. And this goes back to social justice, that mathematics and STEM are not just for a few. We need to find ways to work together and make sure that each and every student has an opportunity to build and connect with mathematics and with STEM. There is clearly, and I know that virtually everyone on this panel thinks that all students need access, but we have an implementation gap between the calls for change and what we need to do at high school and middle school and elementary and our ability to do that. And I just tell you that this is an opportunity where we can work together, we can collaborate, and we can make some differences about those pieces. With that, in mathematics, we know that it needs to be rigorous, engaging. Mathematics can't be I do, we do, you do, which sometimes is easiest in the classroom and also easier virtually, but we need to find ways for students to be engaged, to think. We know that, excuse me, I had to get a drink. The best learning that students have and that sticks with them the longest is when they talk about their thinking and they also critique the reasoning and thinking of others. And that's about sense making. And building that into our core learning and teaching activities within mathematics and across STEM is key. Sadly, there is a hard truth that mathematics education often reinforces rather than moderates inequalities in education. It's true in the US, it's true around the world. And that just means that collectively we need to work harder to make that difference. And so that large numbers of students don't have access to the mathematics they need and to move forward. So, you know, this is really a call to action and a call to join us and work together and build on these ideas. We don't have all the answers, but we have energy and people and a desire to make this happen. And with that, you know, this other piece is that it's tearing about barriers, and that is really about identity. How do we build identity with students? How do we get students to think about the mathematics that they are engaged in? Do teachers believe that they can do mathematics and that we have the ability to make a difference with them, that we believe they can move forward? And that's a real critical element, I think, in mathematics and in STEM. So with that, I will ask us to include all. We need to work together, that we, the STEM education community, are at our best when we do work together. We learn and in fact, we play together. I enjoy that piece too. And that is one of the reasons why I think this event, the speakers here, the community that is supported by this is so important, and that we look to work and make that change happen. And I'm going to see, are there any questions or pieces that are there? Because we have just a few minutes. I think I went a little faster. So if you have a question in the Q&A or in the audience piece, please share that, and I'm happy to discuss. Uh-oh. All right, I love the thumbs up. Thank you. Do not progress. All right, here we have some. That's wonderful. Mathematics is a fundamental tool for physics. I believe most students here do not progress in appreciating the subject because of their fear of math. Is it indeed a challenge? You know, this fear, and it goes back to how many times, it's sort of that first question, what adults, their last math experience was a negative one? And I think that comes back to building the understanding. Sometimes people think of mathematics as just memorizing how to do something. So I just memorize this, then do that and do that. It becomes sort of this house of cards. And pretty soon you can't keep it all together and it just crashes down. Versus the sense making. How do we make sense? And spending more time on sense making actually benefits both the teacher and student, because when it gets back to the time to do review and testing in the end of the year, if I've made sense, then I have the hooks to access that. Rather than sometimes it's like, well, I used to know how to do that, meaning I knew the algorithm, and now I forgot and I don't have any way to bring it back up. And so this building sense making is really core to that. How do you help students who say they don't like math turn the corner on seeing the importance? So one of the techniques that we use is getting them to ask questions. We have something called notice and wonder. So here's a situation. What do you notice? And what do you wonder? So rather than giving the prescribed question, we want students to ask their questions. And the truth is that if you offer a rich situation, then students will ask way better questions than we will in the traditional math class. And since it's their question and their wonderings, then we can build the tools to do that. So that idea of noticing and wonder, which is at the core of sense making, is one of the ways to do that. The other thing is championing the successes students have. Too often we focus on what students don't know rather than building on what they do know. And this building on student strengths is a core idea in increasing how students think about themselves in mathematics and their ability to do it. Does NCTM work closely with major textbooks and curriculum publishers to do that? So NCTM is one of the groups. We were, in fact, the first group to establish educational standards in the US. And so we have standards, we have core methodologies that we think engage students, but there isn't direct work with any publisher, or we don't endorse any specific textbook. We do have a wide range of resources that help teachers understand content and also understand the teaching. I would highlight, and somebody yesterday highlighted 5 Practices by Peg Smith, which is a great book on questioning and how to build questioning. We also have a book called Principles to Actions, which outlines the effective teaching practices, research-informed effective teaching practices, and equitable teaching practices. And that builds into a series called Taking Action, which actually says, how do you apply that at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels? And so that's how we're giving guidance to those that are developing curriculum and supporting teachers and professional development. All right. And I know Kelly was just in here. She popped in.
I'm here. I was just there and I was back. You know, David, I really appreciate, because, you know, I've heard you present several times, but, you know, math, you always make it so clear and so relevant to whatever the circumstances are that I'm always grateful for it, because sometimes math can be so complex. And you look at it and, you know, your whole point about memorization, And I think this is a way that it starts to really engage us all into a conversation, which we need to be having about it, because sometimes math gets pushed aside, and I really get discouraged when people say, oh, I wasn't good at math, or, they have that negative connotation. And I always feel like anybody can be good at math. It might just not be right at the moment, but if we stick with it and we're problem solvers and we're critical thinkers, math isn't just about numbers, it's everything. So I always appreciate that.
Well, thank you. It's about that relationship. And what I would say for parents, because the fallback is to say, well, we'll drill basic facts, right? We're stuck at home, let's do that. And what I would say is have a math conversation. Do the notice and wonder. Ask. There are a whole range of activities where kids are actually talking about their thinking, and that would be a place. And I think that also brings parents and kids together to sort of see mathematics a little differently.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of the comments that's coming up right now. It's that, how do you say to math, a parent when they're like, well, I wasn't good at math either, right? Or, we go to it and it's that positive attitude, right? And I love this one. Someone says, I might not be good at math, but I learned to love it by studying physics. And so, I think everything's connected there. So it's a way of not being negative about it, but being positive.
Yeah, the first thing you say to those parents is stop saying that.
Yeah.
Just stop saying that. And you can say, math takes some effort. Let's talk about what we think. Math can be fun.
Yeah.
And so building those, and then if you even do notice and wonder and say, you know what, that's doing math, that helps to change students' perceptions of what math is. So, all right. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So,